Call this meeting of the Round Rock Independent School District Board of Trustees to order. It's 4 p.m. on, Tuesday, the 19th, 2019. We do have a quorum here. Mr. Math will not be joining us, but he's going to be listening in. So with that, if we'd all rise for the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. All right, thank you, everyone. So this is a little bit unique, our starting time. We have a little bit of a time frame, so for multiple reasons, but we do have a handful of things that we do need to discuss, but one of them is Mr. Spiegel, who's going to be speaking earlier, needs to leave early. So with that, Dr. Flores will turn it over to agenda item C, discussion items, and C1, purchasing process overview.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board and staff and community. Also on February 19th, it's not just a call board meeting workshop, it's also the birthday of President Chad Chadwell. So let's let him know we appreciate him.
I've worked hard.
We were going to have Dr. Presley sing, but we thought otherwise. The name's famous, but...
That's right. Thank you. I love these.
With that being said, it's always a great honor to be able to talk about some of the success as a result of a successful passage of a bond of November of 2018. And with that, there are now some decisions and things that we need to start doing as we move this work forward. So without further ado, the purchasing process overview, Mr. Ramiro Flores.
Mr. President, Dr. Flores, the board members, it's my privilege to introduce Mr. Jamie Spiegel. He is one of those individuals that works behind the scenes, but is very well recognized in the state for leading his purchasing department. And he's going to present information on our purchasing process, why we do what we do. And without any further ado, Mr. Jamie Spiegel.
Get your mic there. Bring it over.
Yes. Okay. Not something I'm used to, but I've got it. Okay. Now I'm trying to make sure that I get to my lead slide here. Okay. Yeah. So. There we go. All right. Yeah. It's a good man to have around. So, okay. So, President Chadwell, trustees, Dr. Flores, I appreciate the opportunity. One of the things about purchasing is the fact that once you've been in the business as long as I have, you kind of get what we call become a purchasing nerd. Mm-hmm. And from that standpoint, it gets to a point where we just, have a lot of interesting conversations when I'm with my peers and, what's going on in the purchasing world. And so it's really a great opportunity to be able to kind of meet with y'all tonight. I don't get a whole lot of opportunities. It's been several years since we've actually had a presentation like this before. And it was kind of felt with the bond that it was probably really a good time to kind of sit down, sit back and kind of talk about what happens in our world. One of the things I came up with this last week is I'm kind of thinking about how my group and what we're able to accomplish is mainly from the standpoint that it's kind of a unique way to look at it is, even though to the common eye it's invisible, but our signature is actually on every diploma. So we actually work from behind the scenes. We are helping in the classroom by doing what we're supposed to be doing. I do want to introduce my purchasing manager, Danny Pullman. He's just passed his 1-year role of being manager. He's a great asset to us, and having someone like that on staff is really a tremendous help. So with all that being said, I want to go ahead and kind of go through a little bit of some information. If you would like to kind of ask questions, we kind of go along or whatever, that's fine. First of all, you need to understand is the fact that what we do in purchasing is actually unique from the standpoint that pretty much everything we do, with the exception of what kind of gets into what we call best practices, we are bound to a legal perspective. We obviously have law that we have to follow. And so within that, that policy, from the law, it actually then draws down into the policy level, which you're very familiar with as a board. And then, of course, obviously, then we get into the procedural side. And I'll talk a little bit more as we kind of move along. But one of the things that we just have to be aware of as we go through the process, and any time that we're looking at making a purchase, we also have to make sure that we're compliant with all those laws, policies, and procedures. One of the things that we're also supposed to be doing within our department, which we're very good at, is trying to make sure that we're buying the best product for the best price, whatever's in the best interest of the district. So there's a lot of different ways to approach that, and so within the purchasing offices, one of the things that we do is we really try to do what we can to do what is best for the end user, obviously, kind of looking at what we're trying to do within the classroom, trying to accomplish that as well. Just a little bit of a historical perspective on what has actually happened within the last year, and just kind of be aware this is kind of the pre-bond year. So it was kind of actually fairly light for our standards, but we did actually publish 84 solicitations out on the street. We did award 84. It just happened it's the same number. Sometimes we usually have a few more solicitations than we actually have awards, but one of the things that is what our staff does is basically is putting bids out on the street, through our processes, and then we had about 7,600 POs that actually ran through. On average, if I went back probably a good number of years, we're probably about 9,000 would be pretty much the norm. Obviously, coming into a bond year, we'll have more POs that are actually going to be issued out. Okay, to talk a little bit about the legal, the policy, and the procedures we actually do follow. We follow under Education Code 44. 44031 is really kind of the targeted statutory requirements we have. But we also do get into the construction side, which actually is under the Texas Government Code, which is going to be 2269. And they are totally different statutes. So we actually have to kind of know what, one direction when we're going to non-construction, and then when we go to construction, we have a whole other set of statutes we have to follow. So we have to be very cognizant of which one we're actually in. There are some other laws that actually kind of drive a few other things we do, but they're kind of, don't play a role all the time. Our policies that we really are driven by is going to be the CH, which is the purchasing acquisition. That one is probably the biggest one that we actually do work under. The CHE is more the vendor relations. This kind of helps us when, if we have a vendor that's wanting to protest a procedure, one of our awards and stuff, we've actually got a means to be able to do that. CI is actually how we deal with surplus personal property. When something has get end of life, that's when we actually go through a surplus process. And then CV, which is actually the construction side. There's actually a number of policies within CV that drives exactly how we go through the process on the construction side. And then within the district itself, we actually have what's called the Financial Information Resource Manual, or the FIRM. Instead of having a book sitting on somebody's desk with a bunch of procedures, we actually have an online document repository, if you want to call it that. So if a end user has a question of how to go through a procurement process, then they can go there and get the answers that they need. So as it goes from the standpoint of what your responsibilities are as the board, again, a lot of these are some of these driven by law, some by policy. We do have some that are actually required by law. One of the examples of that is going to be the depository. Obviously, when we're going to be, trying to set up a bank, it's going to be handling our funds. That is something that does have to come before the board and does have to be approved here. There is also a requirement within our CV local related to construction, is that all the construction bids before they become award have to come before you as a board at $100,000 or greater. There's also within the CV policy is any change orders that go over $50,000 on the local policy side does have to come before the board as well. And you'll see those as agenda items as each time that they come up. Okay, so from the purchasing of just kind of normal goods and services we see within the district, We obviously have what we call a formal process. A formal really means it's not like a regular quote. It's actually do sealed bids. We put something out on the street, we receive them back in, and then we'll open them up, tabulate them, determine which one is going to be the best interest of the district. Again, we have legal requirements that anytime that we have a bid that that we put a bid out on the street and make it sealed, we call it formal. Again, it's going to be a process that we, can have a sealed. We have we have mostly an electronic process, but we still have to have some paper, hard copy, mainly because of the fact that the construction code actually says we still have to receive them in hard copy. So we still have to follow that particular law. Again, this particular one is driven by the Texas Education Code 44031. But within the 44031, there's actually A and B is really kind of be the drivers. A is actually where it kind of dictates what our dollar threshold is, which is going to be $50,000. And then we have a very unique term within the school district law where it actually says that it's going to be in the aggregate for a 12-month period. This is a very interesting phrase, mainly because of the fact that it's very gray in how we approach it, but the term aggregate basically is looked at it from a district standpoint. This is not like each individual purchase that we go out. We have to look at it from a 12-month period, how much we're going to spend in a particular category. Within that category, we have to track to see how much we're spending. And I can tell you, a school district the size of Round Rock, it doesn't take much for us to spend $50,000 in a year. And plus, also, when you have 50-plus school campuses, and each one kind of wants the same thing, so if everybody at a campus wanted to spend $1,000 on some type of professional development books, and each one of those campuses did it, we now are over the aggregate as a district because you have to aggregate all that together. So it's a very unique issue that we have to deal with within the procurement side, but it's something that it's actually been in the law for a long time, so we know pretty much how to deal with it. Aggregated purchases, again, are all going to be based on the district-wide and not an individual purchase. We also have the requirements that within 4431 that, and kind of moving into 4431B, we actually have a requirement that says that we're supposed to go to best value. Best value is really moving away from what everybody kind of got used to being low bid. Low bid kind of exists in the old purchasing ways. Best value allows us to be able to determine not based on just price, but all of the other criteria that has been determined by the district to be valuable in making a determination on what's going to be the best product for us to buy or the services to procure. And so we use things like past history, the reputation of that particular vendor, what kind of quality we're going to be able to find on that particular product. Is this a better product for us because of the fact that it gives us a lot more value than just price? And through that process, what we do is we actually weight them. So from adding a weight to, say, price versus what we call the technical side, which is going to be, all the best value criteria other than price. And then so what we do is just kind of balance those two. And then sometimes price is obviously going to be the driver, especially if it's going to be, heavily budget related, or if it's going to be more of a product or a service that we're really going to be more concerned about the application of the product or service and making sure that it's going to meet our needs better. Price may not have quite the amount of weight that you may want to put into it. And again, that's kind of driven by, the needs of that particular end user while we're going through it. Okay, so I'm a kind of a flow kind of guy, and so one of the things that we always had a lot of questions of people asking us, what should I do and when should I do it? And so we developed this particular flow chart that kind of is a if-then, yes-no type process. And so I'm not going to go all the way through it and kind of tell you how each one of those little boxes works, but you can obviously tell that there's a decision process that goes into each one of those procurements, and then you just go through the test until you find the spot that it's actually going to reside. And again, everything that's pretty much over on the left side is going to be more of those things that we kind of have things taken care of. We may already have it in the warehouse, or we have a contract for it, or we go through an interlocal process or whatever we're buying through another state agency or a regional service center or something like that. But then it gets into the point where If you can't find it there, then you start going to a certain level where you go to, like a quoting process, or you go into the formal bid process. So it allows our end users to kind of get a better picture of exactly what kind of process that they need to follow. So, okay, talk a little bit about on the construction side of it and related to purchasing. We'll talk about architects and engineers, AE services. This particular one is very unique. We have the Texas Texas Government Code 2254 that actually drives how we do our procurements related to architects and engineers. In this particular process, we cannot take in consideration price. They do not allow us by law to be able to go out and ask them what the fee is going to be. We have to go through a process to determine who's going to be the most qualified to be able to do what it is that we need to have done. Once we've identified who that particular company is going to be, then we have the ability to be able to kind of start having negotiations with that particular company, and at that point, that's when we start talking about fees. And the law is very explicit through the process about if you don't come to terms with the negotiations, you don't like the fees or whatever, you basically cease negotiations, and then you can go to the second one if the second one is qualified. So there's a very distinct process we actually go through to be able to do that. And we do it through what we call a request for qualifications, or RFQ. That's a little unique from what we would do for a request for proposals and things like that, or request for bids. So we have two different ways we actually kind of look at it. First of all, y'all are familiar with the term now with the marquee projects. We have the very, large, high-dollar, high-vision projects that are out there. We actually will go through a full RFQ process to be able to identify who those companies are, go through the process of vetting them and seeing which one's best. Then we get negotiations and all that. And we focus in on one particular project. But there's a lot of other smaller projects, the almost 200 projects we've got sitting out there for the bond. Obviously, not all of them are marquee level. And so we establish what we call a pool. So at the beginning of the process, we actually done this. We've already got the pool in place, and it's ready to go forward, with any of the projects we're doing in construction. And this pool allows us to be able to kind of qualify by the individual types of qualifications that particular or that firm may have. Some of them are engineering, some are architects, some are big on renovation. You may see some that are going to be more structural, the geotechs and stuff like that. So we kind of categorize them, and we've gone through kind of a high-level vetting process. And so we could have 5, 6, or 10 companies that have qualified to be under that particular discipline. Excuse me. And then what will happen is, once we have a project that comes up, then construction will look at that list under that particular qualification and then vet to a much greater extent to follow the law, which is related to the most qualified. So it's kind of pre-qualifying them, having the list available, so you don't have to go through an RFQ process for every one of those processes, for each one of those projects, because, again, when you have 200 of them, that would be a lot that we would actually have to do. The pool just kind of gives us that first step. And then when we get into the pool to be able to determine who that company is going to be, then we will qualify them at that level. Okay, and the selection of the construction method. So within the Texas Government Code 2269, it's very explicit about the types of processes we can use or the methods we can use in the way of solicitation. For the most part, it's kind of based on the project scope, of saying based on the level of detail or the minor detail of that particular project, which one is going to be best. And that decision is made by the construction office, because obviously they're kind of the experts in how the best way to deliver that particular project. Policy CV local does state, though, that we have to report back to the board that whatever process it is that we've got for that particular project. And that is actually a delegation that's been given down to the superintendent to be able to kind of make that determination, through, construction will come to the superintendent and say, here's the report, here's the types of ones that we're wanting to do with this particular project, and then they would just come back to the board and just say, here are the projects and what the methods are they're going to use. This particular slide just kind of provides you a little bit of an understanding of the competitive seal proposal, the CSP side of it. And I'll talk about each one of those a little bit more thoroughly to kind of give you an understanding of the difference. But you can tell by the size and the scope from the standpoint of what we do within the competitive seal proposal, the CSP, that's really going to be more when you know what it is that you want to buy. You know, you kind of have a plan. The analogy I've come up with this particular one, you know, between these particular two is like if you're wanting to build a house. Obviously, you go to an architect that designed the house. Once you kind of decide what it is that you want to buy, then you go out to, or you want to build, then you go to a construction company and say, how much is it going to cost me to build this? So you've paid for the plans to be developed, and now you're going to the construction company and say, build my home. That's a CSP. Okay, now if you chose to decide that you wanted to build a house, but you didn't know exactly what your concept was, you kind of knew what it was you wanted, but you didn't know the details. And so on the CMR side, the construction manager at risk, that particular process would allow you to be able to kind of have the architect sitting at the table with the construction company and then having a discussion exactly, you know, what is this going to look like? And so as you kind of move along through the process, your house starts to get developed over time to the point to where the house that you actually build at that point, you really didn't know what it was going to look like until, you know, you're almost towards the end of the project. So that's kind of the differences between the two. And again, I'll get a little bit more thorough through this process. And again, this is not all inclusive. These are just some examples of some of the things we've actually put out there on the street. Real quick on the electronic, we actually have an electronic bidding process, and unfortunately, again, by law, we're not allowed to be able to use it. But within that particular system, we currently have approximately 280 construction companies that we are sending these to each time that we put one out on the street. They do receive them by email, and this particular program does not require them to pay. There are some electronic procurement systems out there that say the vendors have to pay a particular fee. We did not want to do that because that limits competition. Last thing we want to do is have some vendor say, I don't have the money to be on your list, and now I can't bid. So, okay, just talk a little bit about the solicitation methods. I've kind of briefly talked about the CSPs and the CMRs, but we also still have within the law, they allow us to do competitive bidding. Literally, that is getting a bid price and not having any room for negotiations. And so basically it's that you're getting a low bid, you get whatever comes out of that particular process. We've moved away from that only because of the fact that, again, using best value criteria, as I was mentioned before, this allows us to be able to find the best company to be able to build that building. And so we've kind of really never used the bidding process since I've been here. And so I can tell you it's probably not going to be something that construction will ever advise to do. Again, the CSP is when you have something that's not got necessarily a specific time frame that's very sensitive that you need to turn it around really quick because, again, I'll talk a little bit about timeline, but you've got to get the plans put first, and then you go out and bid it, so it actually kind of lineates it out pretty far. Construction manager at risk, or CMR. This is really when, again, you have something that's pretty complex. You don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And so you will take this out to, you'll usually find the architect and engineer at the same time you're looking for the construction company. And then once you've identified who those two firms are, then they come together and you start talking concept. So a construction manager at risk sometimes takes a little less time because of the fact that you're kind of planning and building at the same time. Design build is very unique. Again, what's different about this particular one is that you actually hire a construction company and they actually have the architect that's actually working for them. So you actually kind of have, you really are in tune with that particular construction company, and they're the ones that are going to kind of take care of the process. The one thing that's very unique about this is the fact that you also have to have your own architect on the side that's basically managing and making sure things are still into your best interest. So it seems like you're kind of doing a duplication. You're probably paying for the architect engineer services out of the construction company, but you also have to have one on the side. And so we've never used this particular process within the district. And again, we have not had any of the projects for this particular bond that have been identified for design build yet. Construction manager agent. This one is really something because of the size of our district, because of the fact that we have a strong construction department, we would not consider doing a manager agent because that basically acts as your construction department. They kind of, are under contract, to help you build your buildings. And so we really have never gotten into this particular direction, but again, this is one of the choices we have available through the construction law. Job order contracting, or JOC or JOC. This particular type of process allows for us to be able to take the smaller jobs and identify particular companies that have gone through a vetting process. We do them just as we do a regular construction process. We make an award. We usually have multiple vendors that are under the JOC contract. And sometimes into a tier process, we'll have one that'll be, ranked the highest, and they usually get the business until they call, cry uncle, or we kind of cry uncle for them, and then we move on down the list to make sure that we're doing, the process as fast as possible. But this is more for minor construction. So if we decided we wanted to partition this room and we needed to get a company to come in here and build the wall and all the electrical and everything like that, we would go to a JOC. We wouldn't go through a formal bid process and put it out on the street like we would with a CSP. Because of the fact that, again, if you have the JOC contract, that is a construction company that can take care of it for you. Okay, so again, as we mentioned earlier, the normal, the two methods that we use the most are going to be the competitive seal proposal and the construction manager at risk, the CMRs. Now to kind of give you some of the pros and cons of the two different ones. First of all, on the CMR side, we do have best value criteria. Again, we have a choice to be able to say what's most important to us. We can identify what it is that the construction company needs to come back to us and tell us how good they are in these particular areas. It comes down to, like resumes, things like that. Just like, you really kind of go through and just see, is this going to be a good fit for us? Is this the best company for the project that we want to do? And again, that allows us to be able to identify better how well this company is going to work. Now, on the CMR side, we are not actually asking for a hard bid. They're not going to be able to tell us, what it is that they're going to build until they know what it is. And so what they do is they come in with a coefficient or a fee where they actually would charge us this fee over and above the cost. So that's where their profit margin comes in. So they, kind of a margin from the standpoint of that's what they're going to call it, their profit. Again, we will look at it from the standpoint of their qualifications. We have the weighted criteria. And again, we've kind of seen that this particular process actually is probably going to be a faster way to be able to make a delivery of the particular project. Architects and engineers within the CMR, again, it's going to be a collaboration between them and the construction company. Cost estimates are available throughout the design process. You know them as GMPs, or guaranteed maximum price. Those do come before the board, to kind of let you know what those are, and then you will approve those. And then solicitations for the subcontractors. And again, to kind of do a comparison with this particular process in CSPs is that CSPs, they bid out, they give us a price. With CMR, they kind of don't know what it is, but they'll actually go through a process and actually identify who the subcontractors are after the fact. And we actually get to see and are a party to all of the bids that they receive from the subcontractors. And we actually have the ability to see if there is a subcontractor that we've had some problems with in the past. The district does have the ability to say no to those particular subcontractors. So we have some quality control that's actually built into this process. Usually fewer changes are done, mainly because of the fact that you kind of are building it as you move along, so you really don't have a whole lot of change orders that will take place. And again, the CMR fee is known. We just don't know exactly what the cost is going to be throughout the process. Now, from the cons, again, it's based on qualifications. It's not based on price. So that's where we really kind of don't have that ability to be able to kind of manage it from that perspective. We still have a budget and such that we're trying to manage within, but again, we don't know exactly what that cost is going to be. The owner is contractually obligated, the owner, is obligated to reimburse certain identified costs that are kind of the cost of doing business, the startup costs, things like that. They usually provide that number to us when we're actually doing the bids. So at least there's a point where we kind of know what to expect, what those fees are going to be. And again, the cost of construction is not known. We can't come to you and say, this is how much it's going to cost to build this building, because at that point, we really don't know until we get to that point. On the competitive seal proposal, on the pro side, again, we have criteria, the best value criteria. We do have the ability to be able to use that. And again, with this particular one, we can kind of use price as a little heavier weight, because obviously now we know what their expectations are based on our plans, what that building's going to cost, and so they come back in, and so we actually add a little bit more weight to the price. Again, we do a qualification process, as we do within CMR, weighted criteria. Again, price kind of picks up a little bit where it probably is not quite so much on the CMR side. And the price of the construction is fairly known with them, minus the change orders and that we'll actually see as we go along. Few expenses are included within the bid price. In other words, we really don't reimburse them for anything, because that should be included within the bid that they provided. The cons on this side is architects and engineers, contractor. If they have any conflicts in the interpretation of what the drawings are, we are obviously the ones that are in the middle. We're trying to make sure we're the owner. We have a choice. But there could be a potential issue between the AE and the contractor. We've seen pretty much that this is going to be the slowest delivery method, again, because of the fact that it's kind of flattened out. You've got doing the plans and then the building. So you really don't have any ability to be able to kind of do things at the same time. And we don't know what the fee is for the GC, because their profit is built into the pricing they will actually charge for that particular building. So we get a lump sum fee or a cost. So to just kind of give you a visual, this is kind of a graphic that kind of shows on the CMR side. You can see that little dashed line between the architect and engineer and the contractor. Again, that's kind of a bridge between the two, because there is collaboration that goes on with them. And then on the CSP side, the architect engineer basically only communicates and works through us. It's not a collaboration, because it's already, the designs have already been built or made. The paper's there, so they build the spec. If there is, again, as an interpretation issue, we may have to kind of work those out. And sometimes it ends up being a change order, to kind of make those modifications. On the con side for CSPs, the architect engineers, again, I went backwards, didn't I? Sorry about that, y'all. Okay, so this is the timeline related to the CMR. You can see where it's a little more stacked. This allows us to be able to kind of shorten the time. And each one of these little different boxes represent a point in time. Now, we only have 2 GMPs in this particular example. Sometimes you may have multiple GMPs, based on the size of the project and the scope. Now, when you go to the CSP side, you can obviously see how it kind of gets expanded out a little bit further, mainly because of the fact that you do have to have the plans first before you get into the building side. Now for the evaluation process and the award. Again, we use best value criteria. Awards are not solely made on price. We do have the technical evaluation that we put into this. Technical side will include things like, again, the project price. We actually do have a special formula that we've been using for years that kind of takes in consideration, what is low bid and how close that next bid is to that particular one, using this as our basis point. So the further you get away from that particular one, the fewer and fewer points. We don't do it a breakdown where you get the most, you get half of those and a quarter of that and stuff. We don't think that's fair, especially if you've got some that are very close to each other. We want to make sure that they get all the points that are available to them, that they get that as part of their ranking. Again, past experience. The staff that's been assigned to the project, like the superintendent, or as well as the person, the foremans and stuff that are going to be on site. We do get the resumes. We do look and see if these companies have qualified people to work on site for us and who those people are going to be. We don't get surprised on the day that we start turning dirt. We know who the people are before we actually get them there. And again, any other opportunity that we have for any type of other appropriate criteria that we want to consider, because of the fact that that unique is, like with the Aquatic Center, obviously we're going to be wanting to know somebody that's got that kind of qualifications and making sure that they're included, as part of the points. On the evaluation side, the evaluators are assigned by the construction department. is really usually based on their project knowledge and expertise. We want to make sure that when they're reading these bids that they know what it is that they're looking at. And so we make sure that those people are qualified. Most of the technical scores are going to be subjective. We have different ways to be able to kind of do this. In most cases with the construction side, what we do is we kind of sequester them for a period of time. We have all the books out on the table, and then they just go through individually and look at each one of those bids, score them out, and then we pull all that together and we come up with the tabulation that kind of starts breaking down the ranks on the technical side. Price is objective, so that is not part of the evaluation team. That is done through the purchasing office. And again, the weighted points are added together and to determine the ranking. And so this is just kind of a quick glimpse at, you'll actually probably see these through your board agenda items. This is one of our tabs that kind of has a lot of detail on them. The critical pieces, obviously, the things that are circled in blue. The technical evaluation in this particular case, the example that we provided was 85 points. And you can see that the company that actually won this got 76.99 of those points. And yes, we do go to the second digit because we've had some very close, bids. So we make sure that we get it down to that second decimal. Then the line item 3 is obviously just the bid price. That, at 15 points, as you can tell, they didn't get 15 points, which means they weren't low. So when you see that they don't have all the points related to the price, that means that somebody kind of came in with a better price than they did. And on this, again, based on 100 points, this particular company got 83.44. Okay, sometimes you kind of take in consideration, we look at things like from a grading perspective, that if they didn't get an A, why are we hiring them? Just going to be aware in this world with the evaluations process, they're not going to get all the points. We want to make sure that we're thorough. So having a score in the 80s, low 90s and stuff is really kind of normal. So it's not that we are expecting them to always score in the A, the 90 percentile. But in this particular case, they did have the most points, and I think that's 89.44. But the one thing about it is if you look down, you can see where it has the one that's circled up there. That's our COM stands for that we've got a comment down below. In this particular case, anytime that we actually recognize that a company did not come in low, the purchasing office will still go to them in what we call a best and final offer. And it's just our attempt to say, is it possible that you can bring your price down, because of the fact that we know that you weren't low? And they actually know that they weren't low, too, because we are obligated by law to have open bid. The bid openings are actually publicly done. And I can tell you the construction people show up. They do write down all the numbers and how well they did. Usually they walk out of the room kind of thinking, hey, I was low, but that doesn't mean much because we do technical as well. In this particular case, our staff, we went back to them, and they were actually able to negotiate a $75,000 savings on this particular project. So, there's times when we can actually pull down the pricing on these particular bids. And so we do what we can. We don't always assume that, somebody's willing to bring their price down, and we're not going to beat them up, because if you, try to always make them think that you're going to negotiate, then they start building their price up just solely because of the fact that they need that negotiation room. We want them to come in with their best price. And if they can come back with in the BAFO, best and final offer, and come up with a cut, then we win from that perspective. So the award process, the Government Code 2269 requires that we have to go with the highest ranked respondent, which basically means the highest number of points. Again, we get into the negotiation process with them, just as we do with the AE. We have to do that on the construction side as well. We can only negotiate with that one company. We can't go to other ones and try to compete them against each other. It's not allowed. And if we have a construction project that's over $100,000, that has to come before the Board of Trustees as an action item, according to CB Local. And the construction department will work with the selected contract to establish a construction contract. And so they have their own documents that must be signed and agreed to, and that's part of the negotiation phase. Okay, purchasing 101. So,
All right, thank you, Mr. Spiegel. Got questions? Start off with Ms. Weir, I guess.
I just had, you've used CD Folks here, and you also had High School 6. So when you send out for these and the project doesn't happen, or say like for CD Folks where it's going to be different now,
Right.
what's the process then? I mean, does that just go away and we start over? How does it work when something like that happens?
We have the right at any point to be able to cancel. You know, we're not obligated. Once we put something out on the street, we don't have to make an award. And I can tell you that happens. There have been times when something comes back and it's over budget, way over budget. And so there may be a choice in like when, well, we can't afford that right now. Or we've got to go back and look at our design. And maybe we need to reduce it down, do some value engineering or things like that, be able to kind of bring it down a little bit. But we just basically notify the, contractors and say, sorry, but we're not moving forward. And there have been those times, when those decisions have been made.
Do we have a fee? So is there a fee? Is there a penalty when we do that sort of thing?
What we pretty much tell them is the fact that at any point that they've started to, go through the process, like we send them a PO, we've got the contract signed, and they start to do work, we have an obligation. If they do begin the work and all of a sudden we turn it off, we're not going to make them, take that cost. And they have to come back in and tell us exactly what those fees were and what those expenses were, and then we can justify that payment. But that's not the norm. Usually we tell them, say, if you decide that you want to move forward, but you don't have all of the documentation, you're not ready, we're not ready for you to do it, but they started to do some expenses, then that's on their side. We try and have the communications to let them know that, there's potential we may not be moving forward. So, and of course, they kind of watch the board. So,
Got a question for you. So back to the, I guess it was one of your last slides, you talk about the spreadsheet, and I don't remember exactly which slide it is, but anyway, where they get the feedback and they show up at slide 34. Do you go into details of that, number one, the technical evaluation with each vendor, so they can come back and say, okay, yeah, we need more expertise in swimming pools or whatever. And there's hopefully there's no hard feelings. I'm sure there's a little bit, but they come back and they realize what they need to improve for next time. Is that true?
true. So we always have one happy vendor.
Oops, sorry.
And there's the others. Okay. So what if I was a construction company and I didn't get the award? One of the things that I would want to do is I want to find out why I didn't. It's not because I want to go to the the district and say, why didn't you pick me? It's more like, how can I do better next time? And we really do encourage that. We call them debriefs. And so what we'll do is they'll come through the purchasing office, because obviously that's where the questions, kind of get started. And then what we'll do is when we have those debriefs come up, we actually bring in the construction department. Usually, whoever it is kind of taking the lead of that, because we obviously are not the experts on looking at the technical evaluation. So we can't say why those scores happen. We just know what they are. And so we'll get there and we'll okay, why did I score so low in this particular one? Well, because of the fact that when you were giving us a resume, the person that you put up before us really has never done this type of project before. We don't want to be paying for somebody's learning curve. And so you didn't get a whole lot of points in that particular area. Okay, well, next time, put the right person in there, then they can get the full points. And so we have that conversation with them to kind of be honest with them. It's like going, okay, and normally it's not so much the price as it is, because, price, they know what they can do or can't do. In this particular case, it's more along the lines of, if it's a technical score, how can they do better next time? Sometimes we have some people that are really good about giving us some good detail of how their projects match up with what we're trying to do, and some that are very lax in what they're trying to present to us. So obviously they're not going to get quite as many points if they're kind of not very detailed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moses and then Ms. Vessa.
Thank you, Mr. President. Real quick, can you go back to slide 6?
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, just so we're talking about change orders there on the last bullet point. So is that talking about whenever the $50,000, that's just that one particular item, that change, and not necessarily how it relates to the full project?
Yes, and I'm going to have to kind of defer on that one.
Mr. Moses, if you read that carefully, it says change orders that would increase the cost of the contract. Mm-hmm. And so we frequently talk about the managerial controls within the project. Oftentimes, a construction contract will have multiple accounts, such as an owner's contingency or project contingency or an allowance for hardware or whatever that may be. And so those costs are within the contract itself, and they are changed based upon needs and/or assignments for whatever it may occur. A good example would be the cost to mitigate voids or crevasses at McNeil. This particular CV local talks about changing the construction contract from the outside if you were increasing scope for whatever reason and/or there was a mistake or something of that nature or some other type of need to make that change.
Are there any local policies or state requirements regarding whenever, like I can just imagine a scenario where there's multiple change orders that don't hit this threshold, and then we get in a situation where all of a sudden the price of the project's gotten up higher than maybe it's been communicated. So are there any thresholds in place to make sure that the board's being informed of those types of things occurring?
Trustee Moses said, at this point in time, there have been no projects that have actually gone beyond their construction contract, and unless that has been directed by the trustees to increase scope. So the reality is that we have not brought to you change orders to increase those values. The point of managerial control is to say within our budget this far and no further, and not to allow these sort of things to change. And typically in a CM&R project, construction management at risk, those changes do not come through the project. It routinely is change order free. You'll normally find these kind of change orders in a CSP type of contract, simply because there are assumptions and/or interpretations that go into the contract documents. And so you'll routinely be working along and someone will say, I don't have that in the project. And then there's a haggle over that, whereas in the other types of contracts, such as JOC and/or CMR, you don't have that experience as much.
No.
If I may interject, basically, the way this would work is that legally no work would be done if this came into play. That project would kind of come into whole until the board approved this increase.
Okay.
So from a legal perspective, in our own policy, you would be not following the policy and this actually, in the legal statute, that amount is a lot higher. This local policy is more restrictive, but the bottom line is you would be breaking policy. You would be working outside of policy if you went forward with a change order that increased the price of the contract by $50,000.
Right.
So
I get the. I guess I'm trying to think about as it relates to the whole project. That's what I'm trying to make sure I understand from the procurement side. Is if there's, again, I get if it has to go 50, it has to come to the board, but what if it gets 30 and there's two $30,000 changes? Yeah, it didn't hit 50, but it's still
right. Well, but again, if they did a $30,000, if it didn't hit the 30,000 mode, yes, it wouldn't be required to be brought before the board. But the next one would have. The next 30,000 would have to
okay.
because
because I was trying to get at. Like
yes,
when,
because it would
okay.
change.
Goes,
it,
okay.
it would change that threshold.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Ms. Fiss?
So we're talking about different proposals, and I think all of us know that right now it's a very competitive environment in terms of finding contractors to even do the work. And so how have you seen, like, do we have fewer proposals now? Are they just increasing their prices? How has, in light of Harvey and just the multitude of construction projects going on in Austin and the surrounding areas, how has that impacted our ability to, find contractors and get a reasonable price for the work we want done?
Well, I can address a part of that because of the fact that I'm not talking with contractors directly, because I know that there's been some, understanding within the current marketplace that, we're competing with Austin with their very large bond project. We have a number of school districts around us that have a bond project going on. And so there's what we're seeing, and again, I'll have to defer to Terry, but from what we've seen from our standpoint, we keep seeing people coming in. You know, we have pre-proposal conferences for these, and we have a pretty good turnout. And if I was to compare to what we've seen in the past, you know, through all the years of different bond projects and stuff, I think we're still pretty much on par with what we've seen there. We've had some lean years where we would get 1 or 2 bids, which really doesn't, you know, we feel nervous with those. But when we have 4, 5, or 6 companies that are really coming in, we have the ability to really kind of triangulate well and just kind of making sure that they're all, that we've got good bids. So right now, we're seeing it okay. Now, it doesn't mean that construction companies, all of a sudden, as they start getting projects and they are, you know, overwhelmed with the amount of work, then we may start to see a drop in that. But right now, it's also my understanding is we've got a lot of people that are coming into the area because of the fact that they recognize that this is a pretty good hotbed of, you know, location for them to do a lot of construction. So there may be a lot of new companies coming in, and some of them are pretty established. They just haven't established here yet.
Let me just make a quick note right here. Can I see this, Dr. Flores? This video, this note came in, said the video is not streaming, only audio. She's working on, Jennifer's working on it. Video and audio will be posted tomorrow. So anybody who's tuned in and watching this, I think all the presentation material is online. So just FYI, we're aware of it, and we'll see if we can go forward. But any other questions? I had one for you, kind of related to all of that about the vendors. You're also responsible for all the purchases, right? You say, and not just construction, but
Correct.
everything
Correct.
from milk to pencils and light bulbs, everything.
Yes, I will say yes.
Okay, and then TASB, Texas Association of School Boards, has a buy board, and I think there's another co-op, right? And
Yes.
And those are where you just go out and you say, there's no bid process on that. They've kind of done a co-op and agreed this is the best price, best and final offer, or whatever. And you know, if you need to buy a bunch of pencils or whatever, desks, chairs, whatever, you just go and purchase it through that, right? Something
Right.
similar to that.
Yeah, and so for those that may not be familiar with what a cooperative is, they basically are driven by some form of local government, like an ESC or an Educational Service Center. TASB was actually started years ago. I know New Braunfels and several, maybe Comal, kind of established this interlocal agreement among themselves, and so they went through a bidding process. The one thing about a cooperative is, as much as it may not be like a regular school district, they still have to meet our competitive bidding requirements. They have to follow the same processes we do, advertising and making the awards and all of that. And so because of the fact that they've done that, and we have an interlocal agreement that we've had in place, like the buy board on TASB, we can go to them, and they've met our competitive bidding requirements. So we don't, it's kind of that we have the legal blanket over that particular procurement. So if we decided we wanted to buy pencils from a company that is under contract with the buy board, we've met our legal requirements. So, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, we take into consideration. But we consider co-ops to be kind of the tool in the toolbox, but we don't want to always use it because we are a larger school district. We may actually get a better value if we go out on our own. We actually compete within co-ops. I think we have about 15 that we're members of, and there's for different reasons that we may have picked those particular ones because of certain contracts they may have had or a particular vendor we were looking for. And what we'll do is we'll actually compete them among those particular vendors, so we actually kind of do a double competition. They've done theirs at the co-op level, and we actually then do it on our side. And always trying to get a better deal, you know, try to get, you know, the most advantage for the district.
And I'm sure with the economy, you know, the worldwide economy, we're affected by that. The prices could change, and I don't know how long the prices are fixed in a co-op and a buy board, but, you know, depending on, they may have an excess surplus or something, they might like to make a better offer and get rid of that, reduce their inventory of some sort. And then another question I had was, in that matrix for purchasing, a lot of times we get inquiries saying, well, why don't you just pick the local vendor? Why don't you give them a higher preference? You know, and again, it kind of comes back to that's not in your charter, that's not in your spreadsheet. And when you put that out, you really can't say you get an extra 10 points for being local.
Right. And one of the things that we have to take into consideration is always back to that word aggregate. Because, again, for the size of the district we are, It doesn't take long for us to get to that level. And the local vendor has the ability to be able to compete in some of those contracts that we put out on the street. And, do they have the buying power that some of the larger companies have? And obviously there's, times when they just can't compete at that level. So we do have some mechanisms in place to be able to kind of allow them to do it. There's a lot of contracts we have in place that are actually multiple award contracts because of the fact that they're kind of, I want to call them nickel and dime, but they're smaller pieces of, things like we have instructional materials or classroom instructional. We're not going to dictate to a fifth grade math teacher which manipulative to use in their classroom. And so what we do is we've built a mechanism to allow us to meet the competitive bidding requirements we have with the state, but we also give them a lot of resources to be able to find it, that particular item that they're looking for. And so we've kind of followed the law, but also meeting the needs of that particular classroom. So there's a possibility the local vendor could at least get into those particular markets.
Then I have one final question. So back to the the pool of architects where you and construction, those pool, that's the pool for, but I would imagine it could be for different things. A pool for auditorium or a pool for a swimming pool, an auditorium, that they might rank differently. Is that true? Or do you just rank them and say, here are all of the architecture firms, and this one had the highest score across the board for everything?
Okay, as it related to the pool, okay, from the pool standpoint, once they have been qualified, then there is no more ranking that actually occurs. They're now part of that particular group. And so when we go in and we're ready to go to the next project and we look at that pool, then we can go and figure out which one is most qualified of that particular group. It's not based so much on points in that particular process. Now, I do know that internally we have had some where we actually go through and do that second vetting, where we say, okay, we have this particular project, and we want to pull in and interview a number of those companies that are in the pool and then make a determination on which one is the best one to come in. And so we actually kind of had to do that second vetting. And so that's where we actually utilize that pool. There is no ranking within, there is no tier.
There's no ranking compared to building a brand new school from scratch versus adding or refurbishing versus an auditorium? You don't have any ranking inside that?
Well, and again, like the larger projects, we're actually not going to be in the pool. We're going to go out and we're going to vet those separately. Okay. We're going to do an RFQ. It's a pretty high, profile project, and we want to make sure that, because there's a lot of companies that want that business. And so we want to make sure that it's, gone out again. The pool is pretty much for the smaller stuff.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that's exactly the marquee projects, and we'll talk about those in the next presentation as well. So they would be labeled marquee projects, correct? And so the larger ones, and so you'd go back and,
Great. How many vendors do you have now? I remember one time you said you had like 5,000 or something, and that includes, like I said, desks, pencils, light bulb, everything. I don't know how many you have, but a lot.
Well, on our, in what we call it EROC, it's our electronic procurement system. And on that particular one, we have probably just shy of 5,000 vendors that are registered. The reason why we're down below that number is because we actually went through kind of a culling process. We had a lot of companies that obviously were no longer interested in doing the business with the district. And so we just kind of sent out a beamer and just said, hey, we're changing up the system. If you want to stay on the list, you need to let us know. And, of course, a lot of those emails bounce back, things like that, and there's really no reason to keep them on the list. We actually did a purge probably about 3 years ago. So.
Okay. All right, great. Any other questions, comments? All right, Mr. Spiegel, thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. That's great information. It's good to get an update on that. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, Dr. Flores, do we want to keep going? Do we want to? Is there anything to do with the audio? I know there's comment, the video. Just is she working on it? Just let it go. So,
Yeah, I don't.
Nothing we can do about it right now.
Patty, do you know if they are going to be able to fix it today or?
Okay.
Yeah.
No, otherwise we can. I don't know if we need to take a break. Should it need us to stop, or does she? Okay, if she does, let us know, and we'll take a break after this next one. All right, thank you. Otherwise, Dr. Flores, we'll go to agenda item C2.
You bet. Mr. Wooster will guide us through 2018 bond projects update. So without further ado, Mr. Wooster.
Thank you, Dr. Flores, President Chadwell, and Dr. Flores and trustee members. as we bring up our next presentation, I'm going to call to the microphone Melanie Camarina and Mr. David Hodebeck, and they will be bringing up the next presentation here. And as they do, you'll see the first slide. When the first slide arrives, you'll notice that it says, "Thank you for your support for the 2018 bond election and the successful bond election." I have to tell you that it is an extreme privilege. It is just truly a privilege to work on a bond of this type for several reasons. One is that though as an operations group, finance group, other types of groups that work within this bond preparation and project work, we may not make a direct relationship or a direct difference to students in the classroom, but we make an indirect difference. And we make that difference through creating facilities, and we make that difference in just knowing that we're changing lives in that way. So it is truly a privilege. And so to the next slide, we actually have an introduction, and one of the important parts of an introduction as we get to our conversations with construction and maintenance here is that in August, and I believe it was August 20th of 2018, we created, with your help, an approval of a document. And that document was that long spreadsheet of how many dollars were within the bond election. And we, among ourselves, affectionately call that the Constitution. And within that Constitution are year 1, year 2, year 3. And as we were developing those year assignments, we were making those assignments as best as we could determine at that point in time, at that date. And there are needs to be able to reevaluate that in different ways, and we discuss that as being a constitutional amendment. And as we go through our conversations, you'll realize that, for example, at Robinson Elementary School, we had a project that is a waste line replacement in 2 years. But the plumbing team came the other day and said, we need to move that forward. And those are the kind of conversations that, as we move into a facility committee, to have that conversation, because we hold this Constitution and the year that these projects are assigned as sacrosanct, as true. We honor the dollars with the budgets that are in that, and we follow that very carefully, and we are very restrictive on how we move those around. And so those are discussions that come here from that point. And within the first year, there are large projects, there are medium-sized projects, and there are small maintenance projects that you've heard. And so once we have gone through the purchasing overview, all of these projects sift into different processes going forward. And so I just wanted to mention that to you. With that processing, the important part to remember is that a November bond election makes it very difficult to be able to bring projects forward in the summer. We have very short time frame to be able to format projects and to get them into the field, so that when the facilities are unoccupied, the rule of thumb is that you should have a summer project scoped, documented, priced by spring break so that you can move forward. And so November just is such a compressed time frame. So that's why several months ago we asked for a reimbursable resolution. And I know, Mr. Moses, you had a question about how that's being used. And so within the reimbursable resolution, that was a backstop so that we could proceed forward by proceeding with design fees. Now, the design fees may not be totally charged against, at least we're now able to award purchase orders. And so we have professionals working forward out of the pool, as we've just talked about, and they will be realized here in just a minute. So with that introduction, I should say that our organization is very holistic, in that the projects that we are working on within the 2018 bond cover operation departments, as well as finance departments, as well as innovation areas in Dr. Presley's area and in Ms. Esta's areas. And so we have combined all those professionals and all those at the director level to be able to collaborate back and forth. And so we consider ourselves a very collaborative team working, and that's why you'll hear from several from the operations and projects directly. So with that, I'll defer to Melanie Camarina, our Director of Construction, and she will talk about some of the large, we call them large projects, or you've heard them called marquee, but they tend to be large, complicated projects. So Melanie.
President Chadwell, Dr. Flores, members of the board, thank you for allowing us to present some information about this bond tonight to you. And I also wanted to thank Mr. Spiegel. I don't know if he already left. It was a great introduction to the purchasing process that really fills in the gaps of what we're about to talk about on a lot of these projects. Obviously, it's a very large bond. There are all kinds of projects, small, medium, and large. But I'm just going to touch briefly on the large projects that we're working on right now, just so you can kind of get a feel for where we're at. And I did hear some questions from you guys about some of these projects in particular, so I'm glad that we were able to kind of prep for this. CD Folks and the Practice Pool are two of our big projects that we're very excited to be working on. We did actually have a lot of interest in these projects when we went out to get qualifications from architects. I was quite pleased actually with the number of people that came to us, very excited to work with Round Rock ISD. The Practice Pool, we had 9 architects give us qualifications, and CD Folks, we actually had 13, which is a fantastic turnout. It provides for a lot of very qualified individuals, which made it difficult to narrow down and grade. But we have completed the qualification grading. We went through the first step. From that, we had shortlisted. So we narrowed down to 4, the top 4 architects, and we have completed the interviews for both of these projects. Those happened last week. On that interview pool, we had stakeholders that are important to those projects in particular. So for the Practice Pool, we had director and assistant directors of athletics on the committee. We had people from within the construction department. At times, maintenance we'll have in there. We may have fine arts in for a performing arts facility. So it really depends on the project, who we want to have on that interview committee, because we want to make sure that we are matching the qualifications with the people that really know the information that needs to be in there. So once we finish that whole process, we will be bringing that to you next week to present who we found to be the most qualified. So we'll be excited to bring those to you next week. Following that, we have Elementary 35, which is released out to the public for qualifications. We expect those to come back within, I believe, mid-March. Will we do our qualifications, narrow it down to a short list for the interviews, and we expect to bring that to you in April. I expect to have an even higher turnout for this one than we'd had CD Folks. I've had a lot of people asking questions about this one, and of course we want to remain, trying to think of how I want to word that. We want to make sure that we don't have anybody that's not able to bring their information to us, so we really don't give a lot of information out about these projects until it's actually out for requests for qualifications, excuse me. But I did have a lot of people asking questions about this particular project. McNeil High School and Westwood are continuations of master plans. There's a lot of vested knowledge within the architects that already served for those projects. There's a lot of knowledge about the school, the staff at that school. There's a lot of knowledge about the communities that are involved in those schools, about site specifics of those schools, complications that are on those sites. So we are continuing on with the architects that were already on those 2 projects, and we are working on proposals at this moment to continue on with that. I also wanted to briefly mention, while it is an R&R project, we have Anderson Mill, Berkman, Fern Bluff, and Hernandez that are HVAC and roofing projects. Individually, they're medium-sized projects, but because of the types of projects, we decided to pool those together to get one CMAR to come to us. We did have information from contractors letting us know that because of the climate right now, they are extremely busy. It is a little bit opposite of what the architects are doing right now. The architects have finished design on a multitude of projects for other school districts, and they're ready to get their next projects going. So we have a lot of interest right now for design work. But those contractors are now working on those Austin ISD and other school district projects. So they're very busy. So we had the opposite when we had the CMAR go out. I will mention that those all four of those projects, we used the architect pool to select architects. We chose the the four most qualified architects. Each one got one project, and then they all pulled together to submit information for a CMAR selection. We only had 3 contractors submit proposals for this project, but we do feel that we have a very highly qualified contractor that is submitted, and we will also be bringing that to you next week. And I will hand that over now.
I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the smaller projects, not the marquee projects. Maintenance and construction have teamed together with this bond 2018. In the past, it's just been a lot of construction. Maintenance had a job to do. We've got a big bond and a lot of work to do, and so we've teamed together. I've called my maintenance supervisors, I've started calling them project managers as well instead of just supervisors, because they're spending just as much time on the bond as they are on their regular full-time jobs. There are several projects that we already have in procurement. There are several that are in design, and then we've got a lot of projects, the HVAC projects that Melanie was talking about, that are just about at the end of their design and are ready to move forward with construction as soon as we have those resources available. We've had a lot of meetings today. I think there was about 6 hours of meetings with architects and engineers just to discuss 2 of the projects. Because we're getting so close to, I think we're at about 75% to 95% on our design drawings. And so they're trying to finalize so that as soon as we can get this CMAR available, we can start moving. We are going to come up really close when it comes close to time to start construction about whether we can get some of these projects done or not. And then there are a lot of first-year projects that didn't really need design work with the reimbursing resolution, so we didn't have to ask for money for those. So as soon as the resources become available, there are a lot of projects like irrigation controls. I think we identified 3 out of 9 electrical projects that we did for reimbursing resolution. Those other 6, my electrical supervisor asked the other day, what about these other 6? Aren't we going to do those? And one of the project managers says, yes, but we didn't need design money right then. So as soon as the resources become available, we'll be able to start those projects as well. So you'll see this list grow from these few projects to a lot of projects this first year. And there are other things that don't even need design. We've got a lot of locks at the campuses that we're going to change. Some of the smaller things that we're able to do in-house rather than have to contract it out that don't really need design. Projects that are in design are nearly ready to proceed as soon as the resources become available are those 4 HVAC projects. 3 of those have roof replacements. 1 has an electrical replacement, our switchgear and panels that need to be replaced. Our playground replacements, Union Hill, Forest Creek, Anderson Mill, Canyon Creek, and Bluebonnet have been the 5 that have been decided to happen this first year. And when we went through that process, it wasn't just a alphabetical order or the oldest. I think originally we were looking at some chronological things, but my ground supervisor came back and said, wait, David, how did y'all come up with this list? I can't get parts for these schools. All right, well, then let's move those ahead of the rest of those. Union Hill has an asterisk next to it. Originally, Brushy Creek was going to be the campus that got new playgrounds, but we got together with the construction department and weren't sure exactly where the new wing for Brushy Creek is going to go. We would hate to put in a new playground and find out that it was sitting right on the spot that the new wing is going. So we've pushed Brushy Creek off. I get to talk to the principal at Brushy Creek the other day and apologize to her, and she was understanding. But So that's why you see that change in Union Hill from Brushy Creek. You may have heard earlier that Brushy Creek was going to be one of the schools. And then we've got our pavement replacement projects at these campuses. We're just about ready to cut a purchase order for this group to start moving forward with design. And these were based on the age and the condition assessment is how we chose to do these the first year. I think what we're running into is we're seeing a lot of campuses that are seeing stuff that's going to be done, and they're getting really excited, and so they're really asking us, when is mine? And so we wish we could do them all in the same summer, but it just doesn't happen that way.
So thank you. We're going to dismiss, just to put them on at the ready box, if you will, and invite our technology director, Mr. Mark Gabehart, and of course, just following him will be Mr. Scott Copeland for just a brief update on transportation. Mark is still handing out paper, so here we go.
Well, good evening to everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity. I echo Terry's words of thanks to the school board and those that served on the Citizens Bond Committee, because we're here today because of everyone's effort in getting us to this point. So it's much appreciated. Basically, Bond 2018 provided us budget estimates for both district-wide technology and safety and security projects. Working with Amber Feller, who oversaw the district-wide committee, Jeff Usselman and Scott Stansberry and myself represented the technology area, while the safety and security was involved myself and then our Director of Safety and Security, Mario De La Rosa. And then we, since the bond has passed, we've had multiple meetings, like Terry has alluded to earlier, between technology staff, maintenance staff, facilities staff, safety and security, and instructional technology in order to start planning for our next steps. In addition, the construction department and team have selected technology consultants. If you reference what Jamie Spiegel was speaking to you earlier, these are consultants through an RFQ process that we interviewed in order to determine which of them would be best suited to help us with our safety and security projects and two of our major technology projects. So these three consultants are Combs, True North, and Leaf Engineers. All right. In terms of technology, most of the technology projects involved replacing existing technology infrastructure, as well as addressing growth. As you know, we do grow as a school district, and devices are becoming more and more critical to students and their learning in our schools. And if you add 1,000 students every year, you need to make sure you provide adequate access to that technology. One addition that the board approved was the fine arts program would be adding dedicated carts with devices in their classrooms. So that would be an addition to what we have already out there. And meetings with various stakeholders are going to be taking place as we prepare for these project procurements and then the implementation beginning in the summer of 2019. So we're going to be working on prioritization, and then which campuses go first, second, and so on. Highest priorities will be replacing our endpoint devices, are continuing with our 5-year refresh, adding the fine arts devices, addressing growth, and then start the process of replacing our aging projectors. So what you have in front of you is a handout that I just want to quickly highlight, is that you have the bond project number, and notice the bond project number, that's in reference to what Terry referred to earlier, the Constitution. So you reference the Constitution in those bond numbers that we went through over and over when we did our bond planning. Then you have the project name, the project manager, the subject matter experts. This would be the staff that would be assigned to make this work. If we needed outside consultants or not, and for the most part we don't believe we do. Then you see the budgetary numbers that were approved by the board, and then a breakdown by year of how much funds have been allocated. So with that in mind, we're in the middle of planning the procurements on how we're going to procure these items, RFPs. Sometimes we'll buy them off at DIR, which is like a co-op, and we will always be looking for the best price. So the next slide, and my final slide, is involving safety and security. This also involves replacing existing technology infrastructure like access control doors systems and adding new technology infrastructure where needed. Meetings are also going to be taking place, have been taking place, will be taking place as we prepare for these project procurements and implementation beginning this summer, and then prioritization on which campuses will go first and second. Our highest priorities right now are the emergency telephone intercom camera at the front office entry and the video surveillance camera coverage at the portables. So those are our two highest priorities, and we'll have to work through the process to see how many more we can do and how fast we can do it. So you'll see here in the second page is a mirror copy, and notice that this is under the construction department. So in this case, the project managers are for the most part going to come from the construction department. And that means the subject matter experts will involve technology, maintenance department, staff, and so on to provide expertise to make sure we purchase the right product. And then you'll see here the consultants that have been identified, Combs, True North, and Leaf Engineers. And then the budgetary number that was provided, and then the breakdown by 3 years. The final thing I'd just like to share is that we're in the middle of a marathon. It's not a 100-yard meter race. And what we want to make sure we do is proper planning up front and good communication with everyone involved as we roll these projects out. There's a lot of projects coming all at once, and not just in technology and safety and security, but all across the $508 million bond. And the work will start in the summer, and we'll be looking for opportunities where it doesn't impact instruction to do some of this work during the school year in the evenings when we don't impact instruction, for example. So that is my update for technology and safety and security. Any questions?
Actually, what I was going to propose is that we'll allow Scott to come, and then we'll question the group altogether. So Scott Copeland, quick update on bus technology, because that is an important part of the bond first year.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Scott Copeland. I'm the Director of Transportation. Hope I know how to work this arrow right here. Uh-oh, there we go. I'm very excited about this. I mean, to me, this is very exciting to talk about these things that I'm fixing to. I heard Mark talk about old portable. Let's look at an old bus. I mean, if you want to know the condition of our fleet, we did a little homework. We had 52% of our buses were 2005 or older. We have all the mechanical issues. We have all sorts of things that are just not reliable on these buses. So immediately I began to talk with Terry Worcester, which he's an awesome individual. I'm sure you guys know that. We decided we were going to try to get a refundable resolution for some buying of some buses. If you look right here, the picture of the bus there is an international bus. You're going to start seeing those international buses pretty soon. I was in contact with the vendor because we've already done these things right here with the year of the bond. We've already made this purchase right here. And in October, the board was so gracious to give us the opportunity to get 10 special needs buses and 5 gen ed buses. Our special needs buses are the ones that are in the most old shape. And there's really only, public transportation, we do this, but there's really only 2 sets that you have to transport. That's SPED, and that's our families and transition students. Gen Ed, you don't have to, but as school districts across the state, we do that. So, but our SPED buses were the ones that were in dire need. So we got 10 special needs buses and 5 Gen Ed buses. These also have seat belts on them. Anything that's made after 2018 will have seat belts. We're going to follow the TASB code on that. We'll have another line in there also or two about that. Year one of the bond, 2019, we got 20 Gen Ed buses. We're going to try to catch up a little bit, and we're also going to have 10 special needs buses. I talked to the manufacturer, the guy that got these. 31 of them are at the air conditioned place right now. Yes, air conditioning for the buses. Hopefully those will work for sure. We'll work on that other as well. So that's the first slide. This is very interesting, and we talk about how many millions of dollars have we talked about that's dedicated to safety and security here. I mean, the bond is full of that. And so year one of the bond here is wireless surveillance system. That's the bus cameras. That protects the students, that protects the drivers, that protects everybody, protects in case of an accident. It protects all people with this wireless surveillance system with the bus cameras. It's going to be state of the art. You ought to see. We have called people together. We've had several meetings of different vendors that come and show us their stuff, show us their video cameras. We've had about 3 or 4 meetings with people like that. And also student management system. This is student accountability. What this has to do with knowing who is on your bus. The drivers get a list. You go to an apartment complex, it's 70 kids get on your bus. Wow, it's hard to keep up with who these guys are. This is a badging system. So when the students come on the bus, it either has green on there, it has red on there. And if it's red, they're not eligible to ride that bus. So if a student comes up also to say at school, which it's going to happen, we're going to do the badging system. A kid comes up at school, he's supposed to be on the bus, he doesn't have his badge, you can auto-load. The kids can auto-load. If there's room for ineligible riders on there, kids that don't normally ride that bus have a bus pass, they can also be automatically loaded as well, pushing a button and getting those kids on those buses too. So this is the timeline on this. Here's an example of a video camera here. This is also a student management over here. This person would light up green. You always want to hear that ding that you're lighting up green and not the buzzer that you're not supposed to be on that bus. But RFP submission date, guess when that is? Tomorrow. Turn your calendars. 2/20. This is when it all goes out on the market, like Jamie talked about. All that goes out for everybody to look at on there. Deadline to receive those bids is 3/1. Vendor presentations is that last week of March. We're going to bring people back, like Jamie said that we do. Vendors chosen in April, so we'll bring that back to you. because we have to have a refundable resolution to get that purchased. And the deadline we've also put in the RFP is for these units to be installed by June 28th, 2019. So these things will be ready to roll out right, for the new school year. We've got training, we got all of those things that are going to help in this process. We're not going to have a student get on a bus that just got on a bus to ride a bus. How scary is that a kid can just get on a bus and ride to a high school and get off somewhere because, the drivers are supposed to be aware, but we have a lot of call-outs. We have a lot of substitute drivers that go, and you don't necessarily know all those students. And so, just come on and get on the bus is a scary prospect. But I'd like to thank the board. I'd like to thank the work of the Citizen Bond Committee for getting this and putting this stuff together so we can really upgrade this and make this a Class A transportation, place. Thank you.
Mr. Chadwell,
I've got a question for you, Mr. Copeland. So while you're fresh, I've got a technology question as well. But
yes, sir.
Just while you're fresh.
Sure.
The cameras, how many cameras per bus are there?
Well, what we're going to have 5 in the Gen Ed buses. That's the regular. We're going to have 4 on the sped buses. We're also going to buy about 12 Type A buses. What they are, they're 15 passengers or 14. We're going to have 3 cameras on those. They're the small buses. I don't know if y'all have seen the small buses. We've kind of experimented with some small buses to help alleviate our ALC, where our fit students are there. We want to eventually have like a fit fleet where we can cut that cost, so it's not so much for us.
I remember that being discussed in the bond study committee. Was you don't need a giant 40, 50 passenger bus to carry a small team of basketball players, whatever. So,
yes, sir.
And CDL,
that can,
no CDL, right?
Yes, sir. And you do not have to have a CDL to drive that. And we are going to, we've gotten some, we've changed the FTEs around where we can do that. We've turned in some of our on-call drivers to make those specific. We're going to have 12 positions where you don't have to have a CDL to drive those. And it's a lower wage, but yet still it's some people might not want to drive a big bus, and so we're going to try to build a better mousetrap and attract people that way.
And regarding the badges, is this like kids walk up, they take a badge, scan it?
Yes,
get
sir.
On and off?
Yeah, on and off. So what you'll do, you'll have your badge. Of course, my badge is in my pocket. I can't show you real quick, but it has a cowboy lanyard on it too. Some of y'all might not like that, but anyway, you get within about 5 centimeters of it, it'll ding you on there, and it goes on. It shows a picture. And it shows you green. And on the way back, also, you can sit in your office and you can watch those kids get off the bus or get on the bus, and it keeps a running total. If you had a big tote board, you could tell how many students we're transporting, and it has by stop. The campus will get if we get the right thing, the campus will get a portal. Parents can have a portal. They know where their students are at all times. School will know where they are at all times. All the schools will know the eligible riders.
Good. Okay.
I have a question for Scott while he's here.
What's that?
I have a question for Scott while he's here.
Well, we got some others here real quick. Go ahead, I guess, otherwise related.
Is yours buses too? Okay. So following up on the portable system right here, they're also going to check out of the bus using their badging system?
Yes, ma'am. So we don't have a lost student, because how many times do we have a lost student and then we're searching for that student? When I first got this job, I was an AP before I got this job. And so we were out chasing kids for 2 hours. Looking for them, didn't know where they were. Then, of course, they went home with a friend. But, at least what we'll have the data where they got off, where they got on.
So I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one, but just to clarify, you did say the buses were going to have AC, but the new buses also will have seat belts?
Yeah, well, all the lift buses, all the sped, they always have seat belts. But anything that's made after 2018 have to have seat belts on there. And so we also put together a plan. I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about all this or not, but I just talk and let y'all know anything that you want, anytime you want to talk to me. With the seat belts, high school students, it's going to take more buses that are equipped with seat belts to transport high school students, because they all can't really set 3 to a seat. So it'll be less people in the high school. So we've kind of made some adjustments on the more buses we're going to need to buy because of that.
Okay, Mr. Moses, I think. So,
Thank you, Mr. President. And Scott, that's my question. Just more of a, I think a lot of parents I've talked to are excited about the buses. They're ready for them to come. They're ready to get them rolling. So we're ready to get those going. So excited about that. Going back to slide 7. It may seem kind of simple, but we mentioned about Brushy Creek. We're about the playground and where the wing is. We're not worried about the pavement and pouring pavement. And
Wait, are we moving on?
you want to finish the buses real quick?
Yeah, I still had bus
sorry.
questions.
yeah, the buses. Yeah, finish buses. We'll go back.
I was done.
Yeah, no, y'all all stay close. Okay, for a few more minutes
Do you have
anyway.
a bus question? Oh, okay. I have a bus question then.
Oh, okay.
So in 2017, when all new buses now have to have the 3-point system, also I think there was a part of in there about our charter buses that we're renting, because we know we're a large district. A lot of times we are using charter buses. So in that mandate, I believe that it's also stating that we've got to rent buses with seatbelts. Is that correct?
Well, I really don't know. I would imagine that's true. I would have to check that out to find out if that's
Well,
that is-
originally
that
back in
is correct.
2007, when
Sure.
it all came to light, it was actually an accident that happened on a charter bus
yeah, that's-
by a school
okay.
district in Beaumont, and I had the privilege of working
Okay.
with that family. So I want to make sure that we're following that,
Sure.
that it's not just school buses, that when we rent our charter buses,
Okay.
that they are also equipped with the seatbelts.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You bet.
Is there, how do you check that the kids, high school kids, or that matter, actually fasten them?
Well, that's an interesting thing we have not crossed yet. But what we've talked to other districts about is, the kids know that it's the seatbelt rule, and they said the elementary kids jump on there and they buckle up so quick, because they want to have that seatbelt on.
Well, it's like getting in the car. It just becomes habit. It's just part of what you do, your routine. I can remember when I didn't have to wear a seatbelt, and we were all, now we have to wear seatbelts. Now we don't think
Exactly.
twice about it.
And then one of the directors that we talked to, because that's one of the questions I always threw out was, how do you make them all wear their seatbelt? And so he said that he has the policy that they go to the back of the bus, and they go to each seat. So they put your seatbelt on, seatbelt on, seatbelt on, seatbelt on, seatbelt on, seatbelt on, and then they get in the bus and they go. And if there's an issue, you see somebody, that person may get a ride up. That are not in their seatbelt. So, are they all going to wear their seatbelt? Or no, probably not. But it's hard to. But with our video camera system, we can check that. We can see that a lot easier.
Didn't you help write that law?
I worked with the family. They lost 2 of their girls in a soccer crash, and that was the hardest thing I've ever done, to work with families. One of the girls actually had her arm severed because the windows are so big on charter buses that she was thrown out, and it was severed. It was one of the hardest things I've ever worked on.
All right, board members, anything else for buses right now? Okay, let's, if it's all right, go to the next topic, which is, what's that? Okay, playgrounds and technology. So if it's at the will of the board, this is this is a workshop, a little more informal, and instead of me trying to remember who pushed what, if you have a topic that's a follow-on, be respectful and let's just go. That's all right with everybody, okay? So anyway, I think we're on playgrounds now, is that right?
Sure, we'll go there.
Whatever.
Well, I think, and kind of maintenance stuff. So I guess that
Okay.
was my question. So we talked about Brushy Creek and delaying the playground there because the wing, but we feel good about where we're going to pour pavement. I know it seems kind of simple, but just want to. It's kind of interesting to see it then on not one.
Trustee Moses, that is a good question in that we know that there are some paving areas that don't change. And so there's certain gradient, scopes in pavement. Some just need an overlay and striping. Some need to be remilled. And so when we look at a paved area that just needs an overlay and some striping, that is a fairly simplistic task. So we would fall back and look at campuses to say, if this is a paving area that needs to be totally remilled and totally redone and or totally reproportioned, if you will, we would not go ahead with that. We would defer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure don't want to pour pavement and then dig in. And then
I have a question related to that real quick,
Yeah.
but color of the pavement on the marching pads?
Yes.
Sometimes they're black, sometimes they're gray. Playgrounds?
Yes,
Is there a rule, guideline?
Our plan is to make sure that they're all gray, reflective, and so the one here at Round Rock will be converted to gray.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, and then on the technology piece, I know we're part of the bond is we're doing the interactive touch screens at the elementary school campuses. Is it similar to playgrounds where we're going to roll them out in a certain order, or are we just going to hopefully this summer go in and do as many as we can?
Well, first we want to follow our projector refresh schedule.
Okay.
And our schedule calls for replacements after 5 years of use. So we're now meeting and discussing which campuses have which projectors that are going to be 5 years old this summer. And we will address those first. Okay. And then we will then come up with a plan, working with instructional technology on prioritizing the elementary campuses, that most of those will happen in the following year. And then the year after that, the secondary campuses. So, remember the bond is a 3-year bond, and it doesn't all happen overnight. And it has to be planned out, and we have to work through what we can or cannot do with the budget that we have, and then also with our resources that are available. But right now, it's all based on a 5-year projector refresh schedule. And there's for example, Round Rock High School Phase 3, ironically, is 5 years old. Success High School is 5 years old. The elementary schools are 4 years old for the most part. So we want to try to be true to our refresh schedule and then replace them accordingly. And as you mentioned, elementary schools would have the interactive LCD panels, and what was approved by the board for the secondary campuses was a projector replacement with HDMI cabling and speaker replacements where needed. We've also since then have looked at, and we'll continue to look at, an option of, if the cost is right and there's approval by instructional staff, a non-interactive LCD panel could be provided at the secondary campuses. But that's going to have to be weighed in by lots of different committee members that we'll be forming over the next few months.
Okay, that kind of got to mind, because I was going to ask kind of who we were on deck with the 5-year, but you kind of answered that question, so I appreciate it.
Good.
So, of course, playground replacements. It's got to be the most exciting thing for any kid to hear about. And, of course, my elementary school, Canyon Creek Elementary, is on the list for the first year, which my daughter was so depressed because she's in 5th grade. So she's not going to get the playground.
She can go back.
We do live 3 blocks from the school. So, anyway. I have a question, though, on when I initially talked to our administration about the playground, a lot of times they would say, gosh, I wish we had been involved in selecting the type of playground that we got, the equipment that we felt would best meet the needs of our students. So is that something that we do? Do we consult with the administration at each school to kind of decide what's the best playground equipment for the space that you have and the student population, et cetera?
So where we are now is we are developing a basic, just a very general specification. The playground codes dictate, these types of elements for each level of playground. In Round Rock, we have 2 playgrounds at each campus. We may have multiple structures, but still we have 2 playground areas. We do a K through 2, and then we do a 3 through 5. Once we've developed that spec and gone out for contractors, that's when we'll start meeting with the stakeholders at the campuses, the different folks. When we look at our special ed areas, we don't really have any special ed playgrounds in the district. We have special ed areas. There's a few campuses where some PTAs or boosters have gotten together and bought small pieces of equipment and put them in these areas. The good thing about what we're doing with these playgrounds is They're all going to be special ed. They're all going to be gen ed. Everyone will be able to use the playgrounds. There will still be elements that are dedicated to certain age groups, whether it's how high the equipment can be or things like that. But once we've found out our specifications and met with the contractors, that'll be the first meetings that we start to have. We'll have a small list of a few different elements for your campus. You may want this element that does the same thing, motor skills or different things. So they'll have some choices. We really are, though, trying to standardize. So we're not going to just give carte blanche and let them order their playground online through eRock or anything, but we will be having those meetings with the stakeholders, and we'll allow we'll allow the principals to invite whomever they want. If they want their PTA to add a memorial sign or something to the playground, we'll invite all of those groups to these meetings and be able to. Now, this first year, the meeting schedule may be a little shorter than next year. This year, we're up against the calendar where we'll be able to start in June planning next summer's playground, so we'll have a better opportunity.
So these 5 schools will have a new playground by next year?
By the
next
plan
school
is,
year?
yes, the plan is that they're by August 5th, that our contractors are off of the site.
Okay, well, there are going
I'm
to be
not
some
promising.
very excited kids.
That's the plan.
Very excited kids. I'm excited to tell them that they get a new playground. We'll be so excited.
Canyon Creek is that's one of the unique campuses. They are kind of landlocked where their playground is. They've got driveways all around the playground. So they're more restricted than some of the other campuses where we have room to make adjustments, but they're going to get a wonderful playground.
Here's something.
So I would be remiss without saying thank you to all of y'all for all the work you're doing on implementing the bond, and also just going back and thanking everybody that served on the CBC. I have just this kind of personal excitement after so many hours spent serving on the CBC and seeing this stuff coming to fruition. It's really, really exciting. So I just had a couple of questions. Mark, on this spreadsheet that you passed out on the portables, I know that we allocated $800,000 for that in the CBC process, and it's on page 4 of the big spreadsheet.
Yeah, so there was $800,000 allocated for portable cameras and for panic buttons.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, where I've actually placed this on the technology project list, I've just put all $800,000 there at this point. But at some point during our discussion and working with our consultant and coming up with a plan for panic buttons, that $200,000 of that would move over to support the access control door project, because we've decided the panic buttons make the most sense to be part of the access control door project. So that was just how I've laid it out here.
So help me understand, what is the second page where there's no cost for the portables?
Well, it's because I've attributed that cost to the technology section, and I can't put it twice because that would mean double dipping.
Gotcha, I'm understanding now. Okay, great, thank you.
But it is the $800,000 for portables for the cameras and the panic buttons.
Perfect.
And as we go down this path and we work out the plans for access control door systems, there may be enough money in there to handle the panic buttons, but there may not be, and we're going to reserve the $200,000 just to make sure that it's available when needed.
Great.
And to go back to Trustee Moses' question about interactive LCD panels, and to kind of highlight the process, we hired technology consultants, and we didn't get them really here on staff working with us until February. So we're just now working with the consultants on working out what the procurement process is going to be, and then what's the input that we're going to be getting from our stakeholders as we roll these projects out. So we're going as fast as we can because we want to, we know this is the marquee technology project that we have on our plate. And we want to make sure we get it right and we get lots of input from stakeholders. But we just now have hired our technology consultant to start working with us on the design of that RFP, and then getting the input from stakeholders so that we can have buy-in.
And I just have one last thing. It's more of an editorial comment, but as we prepare our students to be using their badges for bus ridership, which I love, by the way, I have 2 high schoolers, and their badges get made the first day of school, and they sit on their desk and never get used the rest of the school year. So I love that there's this option for this. I would love to see it something that's more widespread used in our schools, that all of our students are wearing badges, just like all of our staff are, and it's immediately obvious who's supposed to be there and who's not. Current students, easy to see. Former students, they don't have a badge. So it's something that I love because the buses will make them start, some of the population having to get used to carrying that badge around.
I think what you're alluding to is these badges are important for safety and security.
Absolutely.
Just that you know who you are and if you belong here on the campus. It's also important because we're using it right now with food services, and we're using it with library services. So this badge that we're going to have to purchase is going to have to be a multi-purpose badge that can do all of these things of above. And the real key is really getting students to wear them at all times. And that's a safety and security policy, procedure that needs to be emphasized when we go down this path in implementing this type of badging system. Because the buses highlight this, but we've already have a need for it just for safety and security. You know, do you belong here, and so on. And that's especially true at the secondary schools.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll say I agree with that too. I think it'd be great. I think now the food service, the kids just had to type in their number. Is that right? They go to the kids when they go to food service.
From what I understand, that's what they do.
They just type in their number when they buy, and not all students eat in the cafeteria, so they don't. That's another library.
They have the barcode on there as well.
And then I had one more question about the replacement of the LCD projectors. You said 5 years, and you roll them out, even if they're still working, or is it?
Well, the projectors are 5 years, and by that time, the quality of the picture has diminished so much, it's just time to replace them.
Okay.
In fact, in the 4th year, they really start to degrade quite a bit. And that's the advantage of these LCD panels, because they'll never diminish during their lifetime, whether they're interactive or non-interactive. And we think they should last 8 to 10 years, which is another reason why we want to do this. And there'll be a lot less to have to support. You don't have to go change the bulbs. You don't have to get a ladder and clean the filters and so on.
Great.
I had one more question for Terry. I think you mentioned that we have selected the architect for the swim facility. Will there be another time for the swim community to engage in input for the design and best practices? Because I know I've been contacted by a lot that have great ideas.
Thank you for that question, Trustee Gonzalez. Yes, the answer is yes. The routine that we've been offering to those who have inquired about what's next, how can we have an input, we've been telling them, let us get to the point that we can bring forward a design professional, and so that design professional then can be in the public in a forum, so that we can have that interaction. I was privileged to be at the table during the interviews, and there's some very, very interesting information that comes out of the design concepts of why a pool works this direction and how it works, and its orientation in regard to other buildings on site, particularly if it's a passive pool, as we've talked. And so there is a need to share that information, and so I'm looking forward to being able to schedule time to actually bring that community in and share their information, their interest to the professional.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I know just on that point, the natatorium, a lot of what I'm hearing is put it on the inside. The outside can always be made to look nicer later, but let's put it in where it's going to do the most good and students are going to benefit.
Yes, and particularly in some of the discussions and the notions that were brought forward is that there is a priority in trying to create as many square feet of water as possible. And so, of course, it's nice to have a beautiful building, but the priority is on the square feet of water, because that is the most practical use for the students and the constituents of Round Rock ISD.
You can get a lot if you only go 1 foot deep, but that's not very good, is it?
So I had one more question about the pool. I know that during the CBC process, the location of the pool was discussed, whether it was Stony Point or Cedar Ridge or at Kelly Reeves. Have any further discussions or decisions been made about the location of this facility?
There is no decision yet, but there is a leaning. And so in order to start that discussion process, and so that it actually could come to community discussion, that Mr. Dwayne Wyrick called his coaches together, and we had that discussion. And the coaches are very collaborative to be able to say, yes, it works for all of us. And so there's no real competition within the coaching team for where that may find itself. And then secondly is that there is an opportunity in both sites that you've mentioned, Stony Point, but there's a leaning towards a site based upon, and I'll just say Cedar Ridge High School, because it has access and things of that nature. But there's still an opening for much discussion in that area.
I'll add to that. You mentioned Kelly Reeves, and that hasn't been discussed in a long time because the real need for the swim facility is on the east side of the district. So Kelly Reeves isn't
Well, I
on
knew
the
that was a
radar.
last choice discussion, but I knew that it was thrown out there that there was some land available, but because it was the need was greater on the east side of the district, that was not a first choice. So I just didn't know where we were in that process.
Okay, anything else for now?
Just real quick, and again, I think it goes back to site selection. And I don't know if we're there yet, but I know in the bond we had in dollars for looking at 2 sites for a future high school. At what point do we need to start, either as a board or looking at a committee to help us evaluate those 2 sites to make sure that the next time a bond comes around, we can be in best shape to move forward, depending on demographics and the need.
That could be, we can talk about that in our next bullet number 4 down here, facilities kind of planning. But I think that's a great idea to start looking at scenarios.
Yeah, I think also this highlights today's meeting, I think, is just indicative of the fact that we definitely need to have facility committee meetings or facility workshops that are regularly scheduled. As you can see, staff is prepared. They will always be prepared, but this also allows for the community to understand that this is a process and that we're on top of that. So with that, and we'll talk more about that, I guess, as we talk about action plans and some other things. But I do think that's a great idea.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. So great input. Excellent to get an update on all that. Our board members, let's take a quick break here. We've gone through 2 hours here. Let's take a break, and we'll come back and go to the next 2 items in our open session. All right. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. So it's 6:12. We'll reconvene here. We'll go to agenda item C3, Bond Financial Update. Dr. Flores.
Yes, this item, Mr. Ramiro Flores will gladly go through this and be assisted by Rosanna Guerrero. So without any further ado, Mr. Ramiro.
President Chadwell, Dr. Flores, board members, as part of our update, of course, we've talked about the projects, but then the funding aspect also has to be discussed. So we're going to go over a timeline with you on what we anticipate for our first bond sale. The first slide references the current amount of the projects that we would be doing in our first sale is a little bit over $182 million. So if you go back to the spreadsheet, what Terry calls the Constitution, the amount is going to be in this ballpark. You cannot do, bonds are sold in $5,000 increments, so that's part of the reason why this number won't match identically to the number on the spreadsheet. So we try to target as close as we can. So our first sale then would be in the neighborhood of 182, a little bit north of 182, keeping in mind the maximum debt rate of the 2648 that we said we would during our bond process. So this timeline basically begins on February 25th. We will submit an application to TEA for the Permanent School Fund Guarantee. This basically acts to back our bonds. Even though we have a AAA rating, we go through this process. It does help us by giving us the lowest possible rates, but it also helps with our credit when we're looking at applying for the credit from the credit agencies. On February 28th, we will bring forward a parameter bond order. We will have Mr. Villaseñor here in the audience in case you have more technical questions. But in essence, this is the start of our bond sale. This allows us to move forward with the process and be able to do the different things we're going to have to be doing. This is a very short list. Our list is about 2 pages long, where Rosanna and company are going to have to be working on official statements and so forth in order to get this process to be done. April the 2nd is where we would issue our preliminary official statement. And then on April the 3rd, we received the ratings from the different agencies, basically Moody's and Fitch. April 9th to the 10th, we actually price our bonds. So we execute a purchasing contract, meaning that we've settled on what people will, how much we're going to be getting in total proceeds. May 2nd, official statement is printed and delivered to the underwriters. And then May 7th, we basically close the sale and bonds are delivered. So this is going to be about a 2-month process, if you will. Actually longer than 2 months. And so we're working hand in hand. One of the things that we'll have to do is to look at the different things that are coming forward from the procurement side of the house to make sure that we provide the resources that they need in order to continue. One of the things that we would be doing would be probably bringing forward a reimbursement resolution with projects to be able to award the contract, and then once the funding we get the funding from the bond sale, that would basically quote unquote replenish our fund balance, because that's a transition that we would use. A lot of times, even though you actually have to issue that reimbursement resolution, the totality of the contract isn't going to be spent. So that's part of the thing you have to remember. So you might issue a reimbursable resolution for $20 million, which means fund balance will back it, but you're not going to spend $20 million by the time the bonds are received. So just bear that in mind. It's a totality versus what actually has been spent. So pretty much this is the timeline that we're looking for the first bond sale. One of the things that we are looking at right now in 2014, similar to the pool for architects, we did a pool for underwriters. And that the last time that was done was in 2014. So one of the things that I asked staff to do is to put a proposal out for underwriters and bring it more current. And so we're in the process of finalizing that proposal, so it'll dovetail with when we move forward with this bond sale. In our pool of underwriters, traditionally we try to keep about 12 underwriters. We have about 23 that applied, so we have to kind of reduce it to the 12. That's pretty much our presentation. If you have questions, we'll be happy to respond to them.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So, kind of address a little bit. I was wondering there with the underwriters. So, do we do a competitive bid for the underwriters or negotiated?
Well, for underwriters, it's just a pool.
Mm-hmm.
There is no fee discussed as far as it's a qualification.
Okay.
So you bring them into the pool. the fees are set when you're setting the bond sale parameters, and when you move forward with the bond sale, as a point of discussion that you select, we typically try to select two, a senior manager and a co-manager. And so based on the sale as a whole, those underwriters will take down a certain dollar amount based on the discussion we have with the financial advisor and what is a legitimate, reasonable request.
Okay, right. But whenever we're doing that, are we talking about them doing a competitive sale or negotiated sale? That's what I'm trying to get at.
The bond sales themselves have been negotiated.
Okay. Why we chosen negotiated over a competitive sale?
We have had in the past, the competitive sale is very fixed, kind of like with your bidding. It's a very structured parameter that if you cannot deviate from it. And so what basically happens is if you set a date for X for pricing, then the board has to be here at the beck and time to be able to agree to the purchase. With the negotiated, it allows the superintendent to make that decision and not have to necessarily worry about a fixed schedule. Mm-hmm. So part of that has to do with that thought process of the flexibility by doing a negotiated sale.
Okay.
Can you explain the difference of those?
I'll let Ramiro go.
Okay.
Well, again, the distinction is the negotiated sale allows us flexibility because if we see something in the market is changing and we don't feel it's the right time to do our sale, we don't have to do the sale. We can wait till another day to make the sale. If you were in a competitive structure, the way we would have to do it is say we're going to open these bids at a X date and time. And so do we have everybody here at that time? If something goes south, you don't have that. You have to cancel the whole thing because you're not going to be able to follow through with that transaction. Again, when Raul is here, I'm giving you kind of a layman's way, my version of what I understand it to be. If we want to ask him further, I'll invite those questions at that time.
Yeah, that's fine. I think I remember that in the past. We tried not to time the market because you might hit it, it might be going up and going down, and you have to sell it when you need them. You got to get started. Sometimes you get it great.
What's the cost difference between going with a negotiated versus a competitive? Is there a savings benefit one way or the other?
I cannot answer that question, to be honest with you. Again, that would be a Raul Villaseñor question.
That would be what?
That would be a Raul Villas. Hilltop's our financial advisor. Mm-hmm. We can ask him to give us that information, and I'll make sure he's prepared to answer that.
On a separate topic, so in 2014, when we had just under $300 million worth of bonds, we needed a tax rate of 26 cents. And this time we're selling over 500, and we're still able to keep that 26 cents. So I guess can you just, and I know you may have talked about that at a previous board meeting, but just for those of us that are new, how are we able to do that?
Okay. The way we're able to do it is because, number one, our values are rising, and that allows us a little bit more ability. Number two is that we're paying off debt. So there's some debt that's falling off, and we're adding debt. So the net effect is such that that net amount, because of the increase in property values, it's able to be absorbed in working through the numbers. A way of explaining it is you might have a $10 million payment for year one, but that pays off and you're adding $15 million. So that what you're looking for now is that $5 million differential, but as your property values grow higher, that's what allows you to be able to, well, I'm going to have $5 million more, but but I have X amount of property value, which, and again, it's just an equation, right, that would allow you to stay at the 2648.
And so that was just a decision that previous boards or the administration, you chose to pay down the debt rather than give, say, a tax break during that time when we didn't have a bond?
That's correct. When there was two things that we looked at in bringing forward what we call refundings, or even a cash defeasance. And the difference in the two is a cash defeasance is we literally just pay the debt with cash. And so it's an early payment. It's kind of like prepaying your mortgage. So that was brought to the board for approval, but there was a secondary component is there was a dramatic savings in present value savings in the interest that you were paying. So it made sense. Do we want to pay this? If we have the ability to do so, do we pay it off and save X amount of dollars in interest? So that also allowed, again, the debt that was existing, that was reduced. And that goes back to you have a reduced debt, you're adding X amount of debt, and again, with the present values, it allows you to stay at that rate. So it's a combination of things that happen. Same thing with the refunding. It has because you have savings and interest, it reduces the rest of the payments that you're going to make on that debt a lower amount, and therefore, again, it gives you more capacity. Hopefully that's...
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So right now at the legislature, there's a lot of talk about property tax reform, and as you were explaining to her about how we're able to bond all this debt at our current tax rate, you're talking about rising property values and appraisals. Well, there's a lot of talk about changing appraisal legislation to limit, your ability to the value growth of. So if that happens, if we have a change in legislation such that, say, your appraised value can only go up, say, 4%, that will impact our ability to keep our tax rate at this level, correct?
I'm going to say possibly, because I don't know. We'd have to look at where we are at that point in time. The assumption here is based on, we've got the $508 million, and so if it changes, would it hurt us? Possibly. When we look at projecting for the future, we usually are very conservative. So 3% is one of the numbers that we use for beyond the third year, if you will. Okay. So that's why I'm saying it's possible, but it just depends on when that happens and when that happens, because that will dictate for this current year we used 8, 5, and 3. So 5% for the following year, which again is conservative, and then 3 after that, and then after that no growth, which again, the reality goes back to it's harder to predict as you're going several years in the future. So that's why I'm saying it may or may not.
Okay, so it really
impact.
does sound like we've basically budgeted for a worst case scenario.
Absolutely, that's the way we. Again, only because we want to make sure that we don't. If we try to target beyond that, it's kind of like our projections. It becomes more difficult because there are different things that come about in year 4 or 5 that may impact us.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions? Great. We're looking forward to it. So thank you, Ramiro and Rosanna.
Fix that.
Anything else? All right. Dr. Flores, we'll go to agenda item C4.
Yes, there are other Round Rock ISD facilities. Obviously, we've talked to this point about Bond 2018, but there are existing needs, as we all know, and so Mr. Wooster will highlight some of the areas where we need to have some discussion or at least some understanding of our current facilities and our current realities with regards to our facilities. So, Mr. Wooster.
Thank you, Dr. Flores. And again, President Chadwell and trustee members, we have had quite a lot of conversation about bond projects. And as we were developing the agenda, I had mentioned to Dr. Flores, but yet there are some other projects that are not bond, that as a facility committee and/or within a facility discussion, we should at least bring to the table to say they are in need of exploration and/or consideration, and namely the expansions and the changes that are along the 620 street corridor. And that is going to generate, as we have talked before, significant changes to how our site is used here just outside our door. And with that comes kind of the notion of how do we begin to blend those changes that are coming along 620 with, for example, the HR area that's been vacated. What are we going to do with that space? And I frankly have some vision planning that we could go into those discussions, as well as do we intend to bring that component back to that building, and/or is it wise, because we are in the process of developing what we call a wayfinding project. Literally, when construction begins along 620, it'll be very difficult to find a pathway to the administration building and/or others to navigate the traffic around Round Rock High School, particularly at dismissal time. And so that wayfinding project is to set up signage to say go this direction, so that, or even maybe change some parking configurations so it makes it a little more convenient to be able to come from the east side, because the only way to access that building will be from Lake Creek and turning right. And so we expect some challenges from that point. And those are topics that we need to address in the near future. We have also known that there are some projects that are not totally related just to 620. For example, there are requests that are coming in what we call facility alterations and/or one-time funding, and it's not. And I use that description very generically, in that Westwood High School and the athletic department, they're looking to improve some work there at the Diamond facilities for softball, baseball. And so those are requests that are non-bond projects, but they become fairly substantial projects as we begin to look at and scope with the departments. And those conversations obviously will have to be coordinated with our financial colleagues to say this is what we can afford, this is what we can bring to you within this budget year. So I only wanted to make that as a mention to you. We have some products that we can begin to look at, and when I say products, some graphics, some very high-level graphics when we get to that point in time. So with that, that's all I really wanted to share, to just make that mention and see if there are any questions from that point.
Any comment? No. Dr. Flores, do you have any?
Yeah, just to add, currently our area superintendents are also looking at anything that might be a safety issue, some things that might be needing some definite, immediate look at or possible corrective action. So with that, those are things that didn't, again, make it to this bond. Also, just remember in 2014, if I could take you back that far, there were times that this board on two separate occasions approved one-time items. I believe one was about $1.6 million, and then we came back to one-time items of $3 to $4 million later in that year and a half during the processing of looking at our facilities that were not part of the bond 2014.
I think also, this just kind of ties somewhere to that, but also go back to what I said earlier about the high school, 6 location. I know during the bond process and even right afterwards, we had a lot of folks on the leadership committee, as well as people who were on the CBC and Journal, who they were going through the process where they were like, these items that were really important but just didn't quite make the cut this time. And I know a lot of them would like to stay involved somehow. Are any of these projects a way to maybe keep them involved or do anything with them to keep them engaged, to look at and figure out what those one-time expenses may be?
Well, yes, and as we've touched on it, is that the the makeup of the 2018 bond basically went to, if we recall, this far, and this is what we can afford. But just behind that veil, if you will, are multiple projects that didn't make the list. And some of those projects were very important, but they just weren't quite enough, didn't either have the CBC support and/or things change. As Dr. Flores mentioned, that there are safety projects and/or projects that actually become an important use in curriculum or an important use in maintenance. So those are the type of projects that they didn't make the bond list, but they could easily come forward. And so I would advocate that, yes, there could be a committee and/or within the body of trustees to reconsider some of those as necessary or importantly.
I think it just plays right into the point of not just the citizens, but our own facility committee on the board to look at a lot of those items.
I agree. I'm going to make a comment real quick, Corey, and then I'll let you go. I think it's be great to look at that list, and like you said, the secondary list, the ones that didn't make it, prioritize those. So if for some reason there's money that comes available, or we look at it, the whole thing about, how long was the bond process? 9 months, 8 or 9 months. That was a long process. And I think in a way, if we had kind of an ongoing, standing, just a rolling, ready to go at any moment, it's just we have to refresh it. We know right away which roofs need to be replaced, air conditioners, and I think all that is already on the list. They just were second priorities for a lot of those things. So by all means, if we can find a way to keep the people who are very knowledgeable now, keep them involved and participate and add to what we're looking at.
Right. Agreed.
And only because it came out of the committee I chaired, there were a couple of recommendations that came from the CBC to explore facility studies on metal detectors and kind of do that as a preemptive, should we ever consider that again for a future bond, or if we wanted to do a community survey on the temperate for having metal detectors, and then also the protective film, is that what it was?
Yes.
Yeah, the vestibule film, and it was something that we really couldn't consider as a project. So there are a few of those things that came not only out of the district-wide, but the other committees that recommended some pre-work to be done before they could really be analyzed as to the feasibility. And so.
Okay. Corey.
So when we're talking about funding projects that didn't necessarily make it onto the bond, but we're considering, whether they should be funded, what money are we talking about using?
The money would obviously have to be coordinated through the finance department. Some mention the one-time fund, some mention general fund. So I'm not in a position to say this is where the money will come today. It would be something to be able to scope a project and say this is the amount that is within that scope or attached to that scope or associated with that scope, I should say. And then the financing mechanism or the mechanics would obviously be through Mr. Flores here.
Well, when he refers to one-time funding, it basically is part of fund balance. So those are some of the dollars you would use. Obviously, the board could look at resources left over in bond funds that could be utilized as well. There, as far as I remember, and Rosanna, are you still here? As far as I remember, there was really only 2 projects that we were still reserving fund, and that's for land in the northwest corner and the northeast corner. But I believe that most of all the other projects had already been tied out, if you will. Is that correct? So all that to say is you may have some dollars in bond funds to be able to use.
Yes, that is correct. We do have some funds available in Bond 2008 for land, as Ramiro mentioned. We do have fund balance, kind of the surplus funds in Bond 2008 and 2014. We ran some numbers, and so right now we're looking at about $2.8 million in 2008 bonds and $6.2 million in 2014. That's surplus at this point.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, over the years, in '08, when I first got on the board, there was, we passed the bond 293, and I think we were saying, each elementary school was going to be 25 million or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but that's when the economy went down. Everything was super cheap. We got everything. We had just a lot of money we saved away, so we used it, put it in the fund balance. And then, of course, Success High School was built with that. I think it was $24 million or something like that. So, but that was well before we were in the recapture. Now we're in recapture, and that's another factor to consider.
Well, I was thinking, even if it comes to the point where we can't do the project, I feel like it's always nice to have a list of projects on the ready. I mean, because like it or not, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, we're going to do another bond at some point.
Right.
And so just to have that already, that list going is a good thing.
Right, and President Chadwell, I might mention that City of Round Rock has launched their planning phase for 2030. And so as we talk about these projects, sometimes you cast a net over short-term projects. Some of this discussion obviously goes into long-term planning as well, such as replanning at Round Rock High School. And so those are the type of things that are to our advantage to begin to explore.
I'm glad you brought up that 2030, Round Rock 2030. I was thinking that's a long way off, but in reality, that's just around the corner. But it's for the city of Round Rock, and it has to do with these long-range planning. I went to the one that I think they're doing it 4 quadrants, northwest, northeast, north, southwest. I went to the one last week, and they did a survey, what's most important to you, traffic, cost of living, amenities, safety, and, you kind of ranked everything. And it was a great planning, so maybe we could kind of incorporate a similar long-range planning for us. It was a survey done right in real time with people, but we could do a combination, So as we go forward, we have an idea where our priorities are from our community as far as safety and curriculum.
Would that go to like what Mason was just saying, to get the facilities committee back going? I mean, is that something we need to put on like as an action item at some point, get that back on the agenda?
I think
I
it's
don't know
already
how
in our
that really
operating
works.
procedures. We just have to
Assign people.
assign people.
Yeah. All right, great. And I know there's a whole lot of moving parts across the district, and of course, this 620 road, every time I drive by there, they're moving power lines, huge, and I know it's going to be a big disruption. So, and then of course the roof leak and all of that. But that's something we have to kind of work with. And so, as you get updates on that, either through a board update or during the meeting, give us an update on it. It's not that we can control a lot of it because it's state highway.
Right. To actually give you an update today, we learned just by virtue of rumor to us that if you've noticed that they're building electrical infrastructure on taller poles, because obviously they're going to build a road. So at some point in time, they are going to be changing electrical services, and so there will be a shutdown here on this campus at some point very soon.
I want to emphasize a point that Terry mentioned earlier that I want to make sure everybody understands, and I'm sure you do. With the reconstruction of 620 or the widening of 620 and everything's going on there, one of the biggest concerns I have is that if you're going west on 620, the only way you can access the current administration building is by going down Lake Creek or turning at the light prior and going through the Round Rock campus. And I say that as a concern as a former high school principal because that means anybody who works at the administration building or who has business there to visit will have to drive through our largest campus to get to the administration building. If you're going east, I think you can still turn in probably, depending on how they tear that up and how it's constructed. But the main entrance to our administration building will only be accessible by going through the campus, either through the parking lot that folks park in for board meetings or by going to the light and coming up by the band pad. And there's also a gate on the band pad that is closed when the marching band is practicing. So it's going to be a huge inconvenience, and I want to make sure our community understands because that's coming pretty quick, right, Terry?
That is coming very quick, and even though it's mentioned that, we're not starting construction yet, as you drive back and forth on 620 on a daily basis, infrastructure is going into the ground now, and they've been at that work for numerous months, and they're changing the infrastructure for poles and electrical. So we'll see earthwork fairly quickly.
And just from a safety standpoint, I mean, I don't like the idea of visitors to our administration building having to drive through our kids or through our campus to get to the administration building. So just a point of emphasis.
Great. Okay. All right, anything else for Mr. Worcester right now? Okay, anything else, Dr. Flores, on that? No, sir. Okay. We'll go to agenda item D1, approval of the resolution to provide for long-term student and staff safety strategies in Round Rock ISD. Dr. Flores, Dr. Presley, Dr. Minerva.
Thank you, President Chadwell, Dr. Flores, members of the board. In January, there were a couple of trustees who worked with staff to revise the resolution that was passed in June. And so tonight we bring that back to you to take a look at again. It was discussed, I believe, on January 24th, and to see if there's any more discussion of that, or if you would like to approve the resolution as it was revised and presented or discussed on January 24th.
And I guess I just wanted to make a few comments about it. We've had a couple of emails and people that have had some concerns about the whereas statements. And those fact statements aren't really going to impact the action items for the committee. The action items for the committee are at the bottom now for let it be resolved. They come after that. So the only changes that were made from the January meeting were the two changes that the committee asked for, which was in action item number 2, that the task force shall implement the process the task force established. I don't know if you remember, the one member came down and asked that to just be clarified. So we did that. And then the other thing was on the April 11th meeting, there was some concern that they might not have a final report. So we did just add final or progress report in April. And those were really the only two changes that were made. But the point of this is to give our community the opportunity to come back to us with those 3 to 5 alternatives of pros and cons that they decide.
Okay. I've been to the last few meetings. I think there's great progress being made, some excellent discussions, and I'm glad to see that, this was receptive and making good progress on it. My biggest concern is that it seemed like the last one I went to, there was a concern that they were like, woo, we got to put together proposals this quick. So anyway, Dr. Flores.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, I do like the progress that's being made. I think that there's a lot of progress made, and I think that the input has been invaluable. And so, again, to honor the work of the task force, I think these are good changes. The only point of clarity on bullet, or number 3, actually, will complete to the board secretary. I think there was some discussion possibly to the superintendent. I said, no, I already get enough credit for making decisions that sometimes I don't even have a clue what was fixed to me. So with that, I said, no, board secretary I think was discussed, but can we clarify, does that mean the board secretary, Patty is the secretary to the board, or are we talking about Steve Math? I just saw that. I don't know what made me think of that, because there is some confusion there.
I mean, I guess it was Patty that we were talking about collecting that information. But it could be to Steve, and then he could forward it to Patty. Yeah. I mean, that might, if we want to keep it clean and have it go to Steve, and then he can forward it officially to Patty as the secretary.
Joe,
I mean,
do you
care?
Just make sure Steve knows about that. He's not here. Hey.
He said he was watching. So.
Hey, that's the risk. What happens when you don't show up? You get volunteer for stuff.
That's right. Anytime you don't show up, you get honored by. I think it's, if it's a formality, a process where, okay, we hand it to my view was it's going to be brought to the board. They're going to give a presentation to the board. Hopefully they'll give us a presentation next week at our, the 28th meeting and say, here's an update. So we can put that on the agenda. Just FYI, it can be a 5-minute overview, not asking for which way they're leaning. But yeah, on the April 11th or whenever, I'm guessing that they will come forward and make a presentation. They'll submit it in writing. So I'm okay with it leaving as board secretary, and we'll have just as it is.
We'll just warn Steve he's in charge.
That's right. He has to show up with a box, and it's got to be presented and all that. So, Ms. Carpenter, I thought you were going to come make comments here. So anyway, other than that, are there any?
with your permission, I was going to hand the note to Danny because there was some discussion today to remind him that there was some discussion today when we're talking about this agenda item that the April board meeting, one of the reasons for the discussion about that was just to remind the trustees that depending on what the recommendation is and what you are going to, whatever it is you're thinking about doing, depending on what kind of timeline we're looking at implementing it, what the timelines needed to be. And I don't remember all the details, so I'm going to refer to Dr. Presley on that to talk about it in more detail about sort of backing out the window. But I just thought it definitely wanted to make
Yeah,
sure.
I think what we talked about was the fact that Round Rock Police Department, told us it'll be 2 years in March that they would not service anymore after the 2021 academic year. So the question would be to make sure we have enough lead time, regardless of what decision's made, to have a solution once we know that 2 more years after this year will be the last 2 years that Round Rock Police Department serves us. So that was the question, if we want to backwards design a decision, so to make sure we have plenty of lead time, because you can't just obviously, within a few months do anything, whether it's agreement with the Sheriff's Department or a creation of a ISD police force or whatever the solutions are that the task force comes in. But I think we all just need to remain conscious of the fact that clock is ticking on the 2020-2021 academic year being the last one that the city of Round Rock has said they could service. So.
And I mean, I think, so April 11th is a week before our board meeting, so we'll have some idea then of how well they're doing. And at that point, if we need to go back and say, I mean, hopefully by that time they'll have some ideas and they'll be able to say, oh, in May or whenever we'll have the final report.
Correct.
I feel confident that the citizens will get it right and that they're doing their absolute best. I know they've got one more presentation after that last meeting with counseling, and then they just want to talk and start doing what they've been tasked to do. So I think they'll do a great job.
And I think both Wilco Sheriffs and Round Rock PD have both expressed they will help with the transition. So ideally, I know that the city wants to be extradited out of here by the May 30th or whatever, 2021. But I think that if there needs to be an extension, the impression I have is that they'll work with the district, whatever plan comes forward to do the transition. So, but again, I do think it's great that we're shooting for timeline, targeting, and trying to get this resolved sooner than later, one way or the other. And glad to see. And I think the committee is doing a phenomenal job, just hearing the questions and all the reports. Some of the people are digging in a lot of information details. So, again, I applaud them for their work. Thank you for helping rewrite this, Amy. And, we'll get it worked out eventually, hopefully sooner than later. But so, all right. So we just need to make a motion on this. Is that right? If any other questions on it, we make a motion if it's like it as it is, and we'll adopt it.
Sure, I'll do it. Yeah. Right there. Mr. President, I move that the board approve the revised resolution to provide long-term student safety strategies to Round Rock ISD as presented.
Second.
Have a motion and a second for the resolution as presented. I won't reread it all, but any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor raise your hand. Motion carries 6-0. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate all the work on that. So that's a step in the right direction. All right. With that, we'll go to agenda item E. We have 3 closed session items. Let me read these out real quick, and then we'll go into closed session. Number 1, pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.072, the board will meet to discuss and deliberate on the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, and pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.071, the board may seek legal advice regarding the proposed conveyance or sale of land. Number 2, pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.071, the board will consult with its attorney regarding the McNeil High School project. And number 3, pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.074, the board will meet to discuss the formative evaluation of the superintendent. Is that all good? The time right now is 6:53, and with that, we are going into closed session. Thank you all.